Okay, everyone. Welcome to the NACAA 365 webinar for today on the good, the bad, and the engaging presentation. I'm Daniel Lauderdale, the Southern Region Vice Chair and National Chair of the Early Career Development Committee. And with me today, we do have all of our members of our committee here. Tim Waller has just joined us. He's the Northeast Region Vice Chair. And our presenters today are Heather Schlesser from the North Central region. She's in Wisconsin, and Ashley Wright, who is in Arizona, and she's the Western Region Vice Chair. And so they are going to give our presentation today, and then I will just let them close it out when we're finished. And I will say this, Scott Hallbaker is going to send out an evaluation following this presentation. If participants will please fill that out and submit it. Thank you very much. So Ashley and Heather, take it away.
All right, well, welcome everyone to today's presentation. Let us start by talking about how you create a presentation. The first step in creating a presentation is outlining the structure or the order of the slides you will present. To do this, you want to start with the main content you are going to present on. Once your audience knows that main content, then you want to give them an outline of your presentation. In this outline, you should highlight the different areas of content you will cover.
Actually, Heather, let's take a step back for a second. Before we discuss the main content of the presentation, we need to introduce ourselves, explain to the audience who we are, what we're going to talk about today, and why learning this information is both useful and relevant to them. So let's take a step back and start over again. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Wright from the University of Arizona. I have with me Heather Schlesser from the University of Wisconsin Extension. We are the vice chairs of the Early Career Development Committee, and our topic for today's webinar is the good, the bad, and the engaging presentation. So today we want to speak to you about creating an engaging presentation that people will want to listen to. Being extension educators with the expectation of educating, it's likely that you will have to give a presentation or many at some point in your career. It's our hope that after this presentation, you'll have some tips and tricks that will allow you to present with confidence and engage with your audience in a variety of settings. So it's important to remember that how you start your presentation really sets the tone for your audience. They often make up their minds about someone in the first 7 seconds. So to make those 7 seconds count, try to be a little different. Have a catchy introduction to help them get engaged. You could do as we just did and purposefully introduce correctly and then have someone interrupt to show how to do it properly. You could also go the route of telling an engaging story about why they want to learn about your topic, or catch them with an alarming statistic. Rhetorical questions are another great way to engage your audience at the beginning of a presentation. You could utilize polls if you're on a webinar format, or you could ask for a show of hands if you're in person. Giving them a why for this topic is also really important, and also why it's relevant. For today's presentation, we want to teach you to give effective, engaging presentations that audiences will enjoy and come away from having learned what you intended them to learn. This is a critical skill for extension professionals who need to speak on a variety of topics to a variety of audiences and in a variety of different settings. And after your catchy introduction, you're going to want to lead into the presentation outline. So that the focus of today's webinar is how we format our presentation to be engaging. So starting with that outline, a clear outline near the beginning of your presentation tells your audience what to expect. It will be your roadmap, guiding your presentation. And since your audience now has some idea as to how we're going to get there, it cuts down on the "are we there yet?" that comes from confusion. So as an example, these are the 3 main pieces that we're going to speak to today. Presentation appearance, how much text is too much, fonts, font size, color, those sorts of things. We're going to talk about slide layout, using pictures and graphics to bring your point home to your audiences in an effective way. We'll also briefly cover some best practices for using video. And finally, how to actually give that engaging presentation, how to be authentic, be memorable, and be understandable to your audiences.
All right, let's begin by talking about the appearance of your presentation slides. Ashley, can you go ahead and move it forward one slide for me?
We can.
Perfect. That's beautiful. So as you can see from this slide, it is really important to get all of the information on the slide. So go back one.
I thought it was lagging because it was up on mine. There you go.
Ah, got it. Sorry, my bad. All right. So as you can see, getting all of the information on the slide is really important. So you can make sure that everything is spelled out and your audience doesn't have to guess at anything. They can read it as you're talking it. They know what you're saying. They know what you want to say. It is crystal clear because it's all on your slides.
Actually, Heather, let me cut in one more time here. We want to teach them how to make engaging presentations. And if someone has to read this much text, they're going to tune out. How many of you watching this were actually just reading all the text on this slide instead of listening to what Heather was actually saying? I would bet probably most of you.
I don't know. I think they were all watching and paying attention. All right, so let's try this again. All right, when creating a presentation, you want to limit the number of words on the slide. You want to have no more than 6 words per line and no more than 6 lines per slide. You need to choose your words carefully. When presenting your information, you want to do so in bite-sized chunks. Presenting in bite-sized chunks allows the information to be retained better by your audience. Utilize pictures, and remember the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. By using pictures, you are dividing the information between the visual and the auditory centers of the brain. Doing this reduces the likelihood of one system becoming overloaded. Text should be used sparingly, only to remind you what it is you wanted to talk about. According to author Alexa Harrison, visual aids are 43, let me repeat that again, 43% more persuasive than words. This includes graphs, charts, and images. Because of this new research, presentation formats are shifting to a more visual or picture-heavy format with less words. Keep in mind too that video is a great way to learn, and research suggests it is 95% more compelling than text. When designing your presentation and creating the supporting visual aids, you should keep in mind the way your audience will process your presentation. Cognitive scientists have discovered that 3 important features of the human information processing system that are particularly relevant for PowerPoint users. So the first thing is that people have separate information processing channels for their visual and verbal materials. Secondly, people can pay attention to only a few pieces of information in each of these channels at a time. And lastly, people understand the presented material when they pay attention to the relevant material, organize it into a coherent mental structure, and then integrate it with their prior knowledge. And I think most of us have maybe heard of this. It's called scaffolding, right? We have to scaffold that information onto what people already know for them to be able to interpret it and utilize it. Therefore, spoken words with pictures are better than pictures with text, because spoken words utilize the verbal channel and pictures utilize the visual channel. When we use text and pictures, we force 2 pieces of information into that visual channel, which could potentially overload that channel. Therefore, integrating an image and spoken words takes less cognitive effort than integrating an image and text. All right, utilizing the right font is important. All right, who's been to a presentation where they've had a horrible font? So making sure you use green and red colors when creating your presentation, as these are easier for people to read and they are eye-catching. I mean, look at this screen. Come on, red and green is the way to go. Then when you select your color scheme, you want to use light colors. Make sure that if you have a light background, you are using light font. If you are using a dark background, then use a dark font.
Wait a second, actually. Let's talk about that for a second. You want to stay away from red and green. That's actually the most common form of color blindness that people have, is they cannot distinguish between the colors red and green. They all appear as green or they all appear as red. Not only will it look like Christmas syrup on your presentation, but those people will have a very difficult time reading it. Also, using similar tones between the font and the background makes it really hard for people to read slides. You're actually better to do light on dark or dark on light, depending on what you're going to be presenting at. So if you're going to be in a room where you're going to be able to darken it up, or on a webinar where you're going to have backlit screens, a dark background and light font works very well. If you're going to be maybe outside under a tent where you may have more problems, more extra light on the outside, using a light background and a dark font would actually be better. The other thing you're going to want to do is use a very consistent color palette. And you'll notice we started doing that for this whole presentation, the white with the sort of NACAA green bar at the bottom. For this particular slide, I've changed it up a little bit just to show you this is one I often use. This blue color is actually called Arizona blue. And by going to my marketing and branding division of my university, I can actually get the actual RGB, CMYK, or hex codes that I can put directly into PowerPoint and set those colors so that I can really promote my university's branding in my colors. And it looks very nice. It looks very polished and very professional to do it that way. So I encourage you to check with your university's marketing and branding division, whatever they call that. You can often find those, as well as some secondary colors that they've already pre-selected that complement them very well. So, like I said, this Arizona blue with a white font is something I use very frequently, and it works very well for me.
All right, getting back to our appearance then, you want to make sure that you utilize as much color as possible. All of the color will help to draw in the reader's eye. Using lots of different font styles will also keep the reader engaged in the presentation. You can also keep the presentation engaging by moving the headers and the titles all around. So here we move stuff to the right. We've got stuff mismatched in the center, just to keep you guessing as to what we're going to do next. All right. How many of you guys actually agree with what I just said? Hopefully none of you. All right. In reality, as I think you probably just learned from what Ashley told you, bright colors can dazzle, but too many colors can really be off-putting. You want to create your slide design with limited colors so that the presentation has that consistent look and feel. Remember all about branding. So utilize your school's colors and keep that consistent color palette throughout your presentation. Consistent design makes you look more like a professional. Don't switch between all caps or all lowercase. Don't go between Times New Roman and Comic Sans or 8-point font and 30-point font. Stick with one font style and one font size and use that consistently throughout your presentation. The size of your font or the size that you're going to use is largely dependent on the size of the room that you are in. It will depend on that room size, how big the screen is, and most importantly, the distance your audience is from that screen. So unfortunately, I'd like to tell you that there's one size fits all when it comes to font size, but there really isn't, because it will depend on where you're at. So best practice, if you can go to that location, present your presentation to a blank room and see how it looks, that's the best way. Now, in reality, I realize you can't all do that. So we do have a few little graphics for you that we're going to put in the chat box so that you can look and reference those to identify what font would work best in your scenario. Now, even though I said I can't give you an actual font size, there are some rules of thumb. So ideally, your title slides should be 36-point font. The main bullets should be 32-point font, and the sub bullets should not go any smaller than 28. Sticking with that, you should do fairly well in most size rooms that we're probably going to be presenting in. Lastly, make sure you use your guides and rulers feature in PowerPoint. If a title slide is higher or lower on one slide versus another, your audience will notice. They'll even notice your spelling errors. So you guys caught the one we already put in there. So watch that. The movement of your title and text boxes to different locations will distract your learners. For the few seconds that it takes them to process that movement, they're not listening to a word you had to say. All right, when creating your presentations, make sure you incorporate as many slide transitions and animations as possible. All right, these really help to capture the audience's attention. Sound effects and music should be added for emphasis of main points as well. Finally, finish off each slide with a background image as we have done here.
Actually, let's back up on this one more time. You want to minimize the opportunity for distraction by removing any irrelevant materials such as slide transitions or animations, particularly those especially slow and laborious ones that take forever to get to the point. Remove music, sound effects, and keep background images off or very minimal. Again, we want to keep that consistent feel between slides. So keeping that slide design really simple is helpful. A few appearing items here and there, such as maybe you want to make a key point or you want to ask the audience a question without revealing the answer right away. Those are fine, but those transitions or appearances of items should be quick and minimal. All right, so moving on from slide appearance, let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that make our presentations engaging. Let's talk about pictures. We discussed earlier that presentations should become more picture heavy and use less text. So let's talk about some of those best practices and how they can help you be more engaging. First off, photos should always be clear. They should be good quality. Your audience shouldn't have to squint to figure out what's going on or be blurry to where you really can't tell anyway. They should also be relevant. Don't include things that aren't relevant to the presentation at hand. Remember the bite-sized chunks hamburgers earlier that made sense when Heather actually talked about it? You can use something like that that at first appears not relevant, like our picture of this horse here, but once you explain it or the concept, it should become very clear why that picture is included. This can be a tool to help your audience understand or remember what you're telling them. But it's also something that's helpful for you as a presenter. You can use these photos as a cue, just as you use your bullet points to remind you to speak about something. So for example, this picture is a picture of a horse. His name is Warengo, that I used to ride all the time. This is the actual horse. And I often every year I give a presentation on tax safety to an equine science class. And this picture pops up in that presentation to remind me to tell a story about the time I nearly had a really bad accident on him due to faulty tack that was improperly cared for. So I can use it as an opportunity to drive home my point. It's a way to remind me that I want to tell that story without having to put it on there as a bullet point. It triggers me as the presenter to tell that story. And so this is where strategically picking those bullet points and those photos can really come in very handy in order to help you be more engaging. You can also utilize the notes section, which we have done extensively today, to help give yourself some key reminders as well. And finally, as we talk about photos, make sure you have permission to use the pictures. They should be yours, provided by a colleague and used with permission, or be obtained through some sort of a Creative Commons or license. And let's talk about graphs now. Oftentimes we do find ourselves presenting some data-heavy information. Graphs that are well done can really help to drive home your point, especially if you are presenting data. Badly done graphs are detracting and disrupt from your overall message. Audiences, I bet you are right now, spending too much brain power trying to decipher what a bad graph is trying to tell you and not listening to the speaker. So this graph, we maybe don't know if pigs can't fly because they eat too much peanut butter, because this graph has no labels at all. We have no idea what the X's mean, what the dots mean, what the squares mean, even what the axes are at all. So let's look at a better example. We actually borrowed this one from the Journal of NACAA, and you see our citation down there, which is another key point when using graphics. Make sure you include those citations. Make sure those graphs are clearly labeled so that your audience at a glance understands what it's trying to tell them. Don't leave them guessing what the units are, what the axes are. they'll spend so much time trying to figure it out, they stop listening to you. So include those titles, provide pertinent information. In this case, the y slope of that line and the r² value are both on here. And then make sure you discuss the meaning of the graph. Whether this is your data, background data from the literature, briefly summarize the important point that the chart is making and discuss its meaning in the context of your presentation. So as you can see from this chart, the live weight of the toms accurately predicted their carcass weight with an r² value of 0.999. This means that, and again, don't forget those citations. Okay, so let's briefly talk about video best practices. Video can be a very engaging way to get a point across if it's done correctly. If it's done badly, again, this can be very detracting from your presentation and can really tech issues can really disrupt the entire flow of a presentation. So here's some best practices for making sure that your tech aspect of your videos will be an asset to your presentation rather than a detraction. So starting with YouTube, internet is always potentially problematic if we do choose to use a YouTube video. Wherever you are at presenting, the internet may not be working or may not be working that day. If it is working, it's important that you think about spooling up that video ahead of time and giving it a chance to buffer so that it will play smoothly. And also don't forget about those pesky ads. Unless you have a paid subscription to YouTube, you're likely gonna have ads and you may not get to control what ad it is that pops up. If you're on Zoom, I have found this to be very difficult, if impossible to do. It's very difficult to have enough internet, regardless of how good it is, to stream both a Zoom meeting or webinar like the one we're on today, and a video from YouTube to share with your audiences. It will almost always be glitchy or jumpy to the viewers if you do it this way, and it has to do with the fact that you are now trying to pull the YouTube video from the internet to your computer and then re-upload, broadcast it through Zoom to your attendees. It will almost never go smoothly. It will almost never look the way it's supposed to. If that's something that you have to do, you're better off providing them the link to watch the video themselves. It will be much easier for them to see.
To minimize opportunity for errors, it is best to have the original MP4 file for any video that you want to show. When you're embedding the file into your PowerPoint presentation, make sure you have the MP4 file in the location that you will be using it when you give your presentation. When you embed, it makes a path to that video. And if the video is located on your computer back in your office and you're presenting from a thumb drive on someone else's computer, the PowerPoint will not be able to access or to find that embedded video. So make sure that you are moving that MP4 file onto the thumb drive and linking it from the thumb drive to your PowerPoint. Lastly, if you are planning to show a video on Zoom, make sure you click the share sound button when you start sharing your screen so your audience can hear you. If you are showing your video in person, then make sure you have external speakers set up correctly and check the volume before you present. There is nothing worse than having the volume too low or too loud so it blasts your audience out of their chairs. Now that we have told you how to structure your slides, we want to focus a little on how you present your presentation. When you present your presentation, it is important to stick with your script. Read all of your notes and do not deviate from what you have typed. It is really important that you don't mess up and be very stiff in your presentation. In other words, it is important to be a stick in the mud. How many of you have actually stuck to your entire script and not deviated from one single iota or word? Please, if you have, you are much better than I am because I can't do it. So even with a script, you're going to find yourself ad-libbing, filling in different pieces. A good presenter reads their audience and they adapt their presentation style to the audience that they're dealing with. If we present like we're sticks in the mud, you're going to alienate them and you do not come across as being genuine. If anybody liked the way I was just presenting, raise your hand. Okay, I won't give you enough time to actually do that. So when giving a presentation, it's important to be yourself. A lack of authenticity will be spotted a mile away. Have confidence in your presentation. You know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about. You are the expert. You were hired in this position for a reason. So keep that knowledge in mind when you're presenting. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. All right, focusing on not making a mistake will make you so nervous that you're going to be prone to making more mistakes. It happens, right? We're human. We all make mistakes. When talking, when giving your presentation about a topic, open up, be vulnerable. If you have real life experience and stories you can share, do that. Don't be afraid to use them. All right, so now that we have talked to you about all of the information that needs to be in your presentation, and we've talked to you a little bit about how to present, let's keep on moving, because you know what? Once you've created it, you're done, right? You have ready to present. You've got all the information by heart because you have just spent 2 days, right? 2 days working on putting together this presentation. And those 2 days have given you all the time you need to absorb everything that's in there. And you're going to be golden. You're going to go out and you're going to rock that presentation the first time you give it. So don't worry about doing anything else. Just save it to a thumb drive, walk out the door, and you're good to go. All right. Make sure that when you are presenting, that you are always very close to the computer. Don't move too far away because the keyboard is our friend, right? We want to make sure that we can hit our buttons, you know, space bar, left key, right key, so we can advance our slides. So stay close to that computer. It is really important as an extension educator that you cover all of your slides. All of the information that you brought with you to the meeting, you need to cover it all. All right, go through all of it no matter what, even if it means going over time. You're the expert. Your audience asked you to be there for a reason, and they'll understand why you need to go over.
Okay, so now that Heather has told us what not to do, let's go over how we should actually do this. Practicing your presentation before you give it is really helpful. There's nothing like going through your slides and your talking points out loud to ensure your message makes sense. This can help to make sure your slides are in the correct order. Heather and I got together and did a dry run of this presentation yesterday, and we actually ended up moving some things around to where they made a little more sense to the audience in a better logical progression of slides. So it can be very helpful. Use that notes section to put in key phrases, statistics, or bullet points that you'd like to remember. But remember that presenter mode will allow you to view them if you have that option. Even if you can't see presenter mode though, taking the time to jot those notes down will help them to stick in your brain when you do give your presentation. And they'll be there for you to review just before you present if you need to. One of the best things that I ever did was I turned in a communications award for a presentation with a script. And by actually sitting down and typing out that script when I turned it in, that presentation is the best presentation. Whenever I give it, it goes so smoothly. I almost never follow the script verbatim, but the fact that I have actually sat down to type out what should be talked about on each slide has really polished that presentation up very well for me. So once you've done that and you've had your chance to practice and you're confident in your presentation, make sure you save a backup copy in multiple locations. I like to have a hard copy on a thumb drive. I'll also always save my things to the cloud so that if I can get on the internet, I can get to a backup, or I'll email it ahead of time to myself and maybe to the person who's running the conference if that's an option. Things happen, technology doesn't always cooperate, so always be prepared for the worst. Be prepared to punt, as we say. When giving your presentation, if you have the option to use a clicker or a remote, use it. This will allow you to stay facing the audience, to stay engaged with them and making eye contact and not having to keep turning back to a laptop. Finally, use a timer. It's not okay to go over time. A couple of tips to help. I know, right? Like, we're the expert. We should be able to say whatever, but we really should stay on time. It's respectful to the audience. It's respectful to the other presenters who may be following you. And it's just respectful of everybody's time to do that. So a couple of tips, put your phone on airplane mode, set the stopwatch right as you start. That can help you, give you something to look at. Presenter mode does include a timer. Just know that as soon as you start the presentation, it starts the timer, and if you may need to restart it if you didn't start right away. You could also ask the room moderator to give you a quick signal from the back of the room at prearranged times at halfway, 3/4, and 5 minutes left, or something along those lines, to just help you keep track of how much time you have remaining. And that's again where that practice goes in. It can help you see if you're going to be on time or not. And once you learn your own presentation style, you'll know about how many slides you need to cover in a certain amount of time. And you can keep that in mind as you're building your presentations. So we focused on our main points, and we've pretty well covered those at this point, but we also really had a couple key points we wanted to mention regarding the content of your presentations. These would be the actual details that you are telling your audience, whatever it is that you're teaching. And again, that's going to be so varied depending on what it is that you're teaching, but we do have some key points for you. As you're developing your content, ask yourself 3 questions. Who is your audience? How much background do they already have? Are they ag producers, ag industry, general public, not involved in ag at all? How much lingo are they likely to understand? Are you going to need to define some key terms before you get started? This is really going to affect how I approach a topic. So if I'm going to frame my discussion around raising beef on public lands, I'm going to frame that discussion a little bit differently depending on if I'm talking to general public, recreational users, industry, or beef producers. That's going to make a difference in how I approach that topic. What background information does that audience need to understand what I'm going to tell them? I don't necessarily need to do an extensive in-depth literature review, but making sure I highlight some key pieces of basic information early in the presentation can help set the stage and make sure that everybody understands the actual meat that I want to tell them when I get to it. So for example, if I'm going to talk about drought, I often start out looking at the recent important changes in the drought monitor. Or if I'm discussing supplementation strategies for beef cattle, I might start with what minerals are actually important for beef cattle and why, so that when I get there and start telling them about them, they have this understanding of why they're important. Finally, make sure what is the take-home message that I want to convey. Make sure that the main point of my presentation is clear, and that I finish with some actionable steps that they can take. So for example, if I'm discussing predator-proof housing with backyard chicken owners, I will discuss in depth as part of my presentation the key components of a good coop, and then finish up with a take-home of what are the big points that they should think about when they're designing a coop, so that they have those in the forefront of their mind as they walk away from my presentation. And at the end, the other great thing you can do is point them to maybe some more in-depth resources where they can interact more with the material, and use the information discussed to learn a little bit more than what you might have been able to provide in your presentation. And again, your content is in part also driven by your personal style. Maybe you like to include a little humor, as we've kind of done today, some engaging stories. Maybe you have significant background with the topic, and can share your experiences. Whatever your personal style is, that's part of being authentic, and it can really help drive those key points in your content. Just make sure that those stories and experiences are relevant, so no going down rabbit holes or chasing pretty butterflies, keep them on track, and that your jokes are appropriate for all audiences.
All right, so some key things to remember from this presentation. People learn better when words are presented verbally rather than through text. Speaking with pictures is better than speaking alone. People learn better when extraneous visual materials are excluded. So keep your slides to very simple, or keep them to a minimum, and make sure you're branding, right? Keep that consistent theme throughout. Lastly, some additional tips that we would like to share with you for success. Start messy. Get all of your information on the page or on a PowerPoint slide, whatever you're using to draft your initial presentation. Then edit it ruthlessly, okay? So just edit the bejesus out of it. At first, you might think there's no way, I've got too much information on here, but the more you look at it and the more you whittle it out, you'll be able to get it down to those 6 words per line, no more than 6 lines per slide. Get someone else to look at it. All right. A fresh pair of eyes can work miracles when it comes to refining your presentation. You know, I would work on it a little bit. I'd send it to Ashley. She'd work on it a little bit. We even involve some of our colleagues. And actually, by sending it to one of our colleagues is when we learned that we hadn't included anything about a timeline. Okay, there was nothing about scheduling when to start working on a presentation. So make sure you leave enough time to develop, practice, and tweak your presentation. Work backwards from your deadline to identify a starting date. You need to allow plenty of time to have it reviewed. Give your reviewers at least a week or two, if you can make that happen, to look it over, and then allow time after you get it back to incorporate those changes. And again, make sure you practice. You have to leave room and time to practice. There's nothing worse than not leaving enough time to get it practiced.
So a call to action is the best way to wrap up your presentation, as we've said several times. With strength and impact, you want to let your audience know what you want them to do next. So our call to action to you today is we challenge you to use some of the tips and tricks we've given you in this presentation to make your next presentation engaging and memorable for your audiences. And I believe we also have some additional references for you that Danny's going to drop in the chat. Some additional reading that you may want to look at as you're designing your next presentation. With that, I think we've wrapped up more than on time. And are there any questions? I haven't been able to monitor the chat, so maybe Danny can help us out with that. I don't see any questions.
I did not see any questions either, and I apologize. I must have missed my first cue for the first set of links.
That's all right. They're all in there now.
I'm
How
both here now.
All right. We'll give people a minute and see if they come up with anything pressing, but it doesn't look like anybody had any questions. So
We did just that great of a job.
I love it.
Either that or they're all sleeping because we bored them to death. Hopefully not. Oh, Laura says we did. We bored them all to death. I'm kidding. I know you meant the first comment.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, I'll put it out there. If you guys have questions, you know, utilize the resources, utilize the PDF links for the fonts that we put in there, and don't hesitate. Give Ashley or me a call or shoot us an email and we'll be happy to help you out, even if you need just reviewers for your presentations. And
Actually,
I did throw Ashley in there, but
I see a question has, yes, I would be happy to do that too, but I see a question has popped up in the Q&A box. How do these tips translate to asynchronous presentations? Any changes you would make? Actually, I don't think I would make any changes. Everything that applies to live applies to asynchronous. The best part about asynchronous is you get to have do-overs. So as you're filming, and I filmed a few of these, you can actually just take a pause. If you messed up a slide, take a quick pause, restart, and then you can go back and trim that little piece out of your video and smooth it over and make it look like it never even happened. So asynchronous is actually, I think, even easier to get correct because you get the opportunity for a do-over, which you don't really get in a live scenario. You know, you guys heard me stumble a couple of times as I got started. And part of that is because I'm running two computers, one to share and one with my notes, because one can't handle both, it will die on me. And I would just disappear because it would shut itself down. So with the asynchronous, you don't have that, right? Like it's you get to do it over if you messed it up. Heather, do you have anything to add?
I would just say with asynchronous, I have found it is a lot harder where it sound like you're reading a script. So you really have to try to be natural when you're recording that way.
One thing that helped me when I was doing it was to have somebody else on Zoom with me, because we recorded it on Zoom, so that you don't feel like you're talking to nothing, because that, for whatever reason, that always just feels super awkward. So having a friend with you on Zoom can really help feel a little more natural. You feel like you're actually giving your presentation to somebody, and they can also tell you where maybe stuff didn't quite work, or hey, maybe you want to just say that one more time. It didn't quite come out the way it was supposed to. That's one helpful trick if you're doing asynchronous, if you have a friend who can do that for you. All right, I don't see any other questions. So I think with that, I think we're done then. Danny, do we just end it, and Scott will put the recording up for us, right?
And Scott's
Yeah.
gonna send out an eval too.
Yeah, don't forget about that eval.
Yes, Scott will send the survey, and I believe he put in the chat that he would try to have this on the NACAA YouTube page, which is linked on the website by tomorrow.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for attending today and all your comments. They're great.
Thanks, everyone.